Golduck is not worth it, they say. You have to log in all the time for Golduck to be worth it, they say. Well, who are you going to trust about this? The people who are obviously not using Golduck, or someone who has gone all in and has run Golduck every day since the Suicune event? Look, the short answer is yes. Players who log into the game like Psychopaths benefit the most from the Psyduck evolution. But I think more players would be running Golduck if they had the proper tools to assess it. Happy screen time, and thank you for subscribing for Pokemon Sleep Rotomfoolery. No doubt about it, Golduck is strong. It is one of the strongest Pokemon in the entire game. Even a mediocre Golduck with a maxed out main skill level is one of the strongest things you could use in any area. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying settle for a mediocre Golduck. Psyduck is psychotically easy to hunt in this game. If you are considering a Golduck, you might as well find a great one. But if you're thinking that you probably wouldn't take its main skill up to level 7, there are probably better generalist options for you. That said, the reason that players call them Goldseas is because of Golduck. If I say it on the channel, it becomes canon. I mean, we're establishing new terminology here all the time. We might as well establish some of the lore. Additionally, if you are a free-to-play player, the best long-term use of your very limited main skill seeds is a good healer. Seed responsibly. But the topic you turned in to find out about: do I have to log in more often than I want to benefit from Golduck's majesty? The answer depends, of course, on how often you want to log into the game, which I don't know. So in order to answer the question, I had to go build another simulator. Yes, a cousin to the one that you all thought was kind of interesting, but that most of you didn't end up watching the whole video on. But no worries, because you're here watching this one, and I know that today is the day that some of you are finally going to put some respect on this channel. More than half of my watch hours come from people who have not subscribed. Please help make bringing videos like these to you worth my time by getting down to that subscribe button. The power is in your hands, or thumbs if you're on mobile. Please let this be the video that earns your subscription. So what do we have here? What does this thing tell us about the Golden Goose? As you might have guessed, I have simulated 100 days of Golduck production, and what I set out to figure out is, how much do I actually miss out on from a Golduck by not logging in frequently enough? How often do I actually miss a skill trigger? And what does that do to my Snorlax strength? We're going to talk through what's here and what I've learned in the process, and I know we're looking at a spreadsheet, but I promise to make this as painless as possible. We're going to start this process by playing Arceus and creating the ultimate Golduck that statistically someone out there has, but probably not any of us. Why are we looking at the best theoretical Golduck? Isn't that non-pragmatic? Because theoretically, this Golduck would require us to log in the most. So if we could look at the extreme example, then we would know that any other Golduck we bring to the table would require us to log in a little bit less often. And this will help us have realistic expectations about how bad things could get if they first got really ducking good. So, a hypothetically perfect level 50 Golduck. I tried to find the absolute best combination of speed and skill triggers that I could get Rainanex to output. I wish there was another way, but you're going to have to use Rainanex to get the specific numbers for your Golduck. And for those who already know what this means, I've set this up to have max energy, infinite inventory, a good camp ticket, and I rounded up a little bit more even for potential helping bonuses. And for those of you who are like, what the duck is that about? I'll show you later in the video everything you're going to need to know to configure in Rainanex to make sure that you get this right. Because if you're going to be assessing a Golduck, every possible help or production in the day matters. So now let us input the most unreal but yet still theoretically possible Golduck into this tool. The Goldfather. We're going to configure its skill trigger rate, its helps per day, as well as its time between helps, the main skill level that we want to evaluate it at, the area bonus of the area where we would be running it, and once the help duration minutes are set, you can select your collection target. How many minutes do you think you will take to log in throughout the day? Now, I know I said we rounded up for helping bonus, but also we're going to be setting this at 15 minutes to just make all of these numbers super simple. That way, we can easily look at intervals like a half hour to an hour to 2 hours. But trust me, you are never going to find a Golduck that is this good. Or if you do, you need to quit your day job and start checking Pokemon Sleep constantly. The first thing we're going to see on the tool is the number of triggers that happen in a day. Again, this is across 100 days, so what is the day with the least triggers, what is the day with the most triggers, and what is the average across that 100 days? Now, the number of triggers that occurs is not affected by how often you log in. What is affected is how many skill triggers you miss. Now, running this simulation with this Golduck, the cap is going to be 2 hours, but even if we log in every 2 hours, there are still going to be days where we don't miss a single skill trigger. That said, for the simulation I just ran, there are going to be days where we log in every 2 hours and miss 19 skill triggers. That is an insane amount. Then we can see on each interval, if we take away the misses that we missed on those days, how many actual skill trigger collections are there? And then what I think is most valuable, what percentage of the triggers do we actually get? And for the sake of example here, we're going to stick with evaluating at that 2 hour mark, which for this Golduck tends to come out at about 67-ish%. Now, this is a simulator tool. Every time you make an edit, the simulation is going to run again. We can simulate this over and over and over, but you will see that those numbers always fall within a pretty close range of each other. If you're interested, I've also added a visual where you can see each of those 100 days and how many misses there were on each day. So pretty obvious here, the more we log in, the more often we're going to get the skill triggers. In this case, because our duration is 15 minutes, if we were to check the game every 30 minutes, we would never miss a skill trigger. But at 45 minutes, we would miss some. At an hour, we'd miss some more. But let's look at how costly that actually is at the 2 hour mark. If we only get 67%-ish of the triggers, what does that do to our strength? This is where we come into the next section of the tool. As you know, charge strength S can be a fixed or a variable amount, and Psyduck and Golduck are one of those variable skill users. So I have charge strength worst, which would be if every main skill triggered at the absolute minimum possible, how much strength would be generated. The minimum generated of the worst strength is on the day with the least skill triggers, what was the minimum strength that would have been generated? And the maximum is on the day with the most skill triggers, again, times that minimum amount, what is the strength that would be generated? Skipping down 2 sections, we see charge strength best. This is the upper end calculation. If RNG always chose the absolute maximum, which it's never going to choose the absolute minimum or maximum, it's always going to choose something in between. But theoretically, if RNG was in the most favorable of favorables, how high could this get? And then in between there is right smack dab in the middle of those numbers. What is the average strength? It's a simple average. There's no RNG involved. Then we're going to look over to the next section where you will see charge strength RNG 1, 2, and 3. This is assigning an actual RNG generated skill value that takes into account the level you selected and the area bonus to generate a unique value for each skill trigger in the period. Now, for sake of making sure that things were running smoothly, I generated 3 sets of these numbers. So in effect, there's 300 days of production here. But across these RNG numbers, you'll see that the minimum, average, and maximum values across the days come out to be very consistent. And they also come out being very consistent with that simple average calculation from the first column. Not only that, even though all of the numbers are randomly generated, you're going to see that the collected skill trigger percentage very closely corresponds to the collected strength percentage. That is, when we're looking at the average strength. And if you'd like, there's also a chart where you can see the total strength added from each day across the various RNG simulations. And I find it interesting that even though you'll see blue and red and yellow dots in different orders across all of those days, the strength almost always comes out to be very close to each other. So even though this is all RNG based, you can still, on average, rely on a certain amount of strength. Last but not least, we have some histograms of those 3 RNG simulations that show the distribution of strength collected. Now you're going to see that some days you don't get a lot of strength collected, and some days you get a lot higher than the average collected. So to validate that we actually could reliably count on a certain amount, I made an additional visual that shows the breakdown of every 7 days from the simulation. As you can see, even though RNG is a huge factor for Golduck, even on a weekly basis, the strength comes out pretty consistently. The lucky days balance out the unlucky days. And please note that these charts are showing the collected skill trigger strength, not the possible skill trigger strength. So even when we miss the skill triggers, we're seeing the consistency. So we're not going to mess around with this simulator all that much right now, but what we are going to do is talk about what I figured out while I was messing with it. Before I share my findings overall, let me share one more thing that I figured out as I was looking at my Golduck Hanabi. My Golduck adds another 5 minutes to each help duration, which means that the Goldfather does 8 helps before my Golduck would do 6 helps. I actually get more skill trigger collections and more strength percentage-wise, meaning I don't miss as much because it's going slower and it doesn't require me to check as often. So the slower the Golduck, the less likely you are to miss the skill triggers. Let's talk about the findings from all this. The better your Golduck is, the more skill triggers you're gonna miss. That's the bottom line. It's just the nature of the beast. But if you ran a slower one and collected more skill triggers, you might be breaking even. Because yeah, you'll miss more with the best Golduck in the world, but you'll probably still get more strength than you would on a weaker Golduck, even if you're not collecting as often. And if you want to validate that, here's the tool. Another thing I learned, even collecting skill triggers every hour with a mediocre Golduck, there are still going to be days that I miss skill triggers. Some days I just leave my phone open and I'm just tapping on Golduck throughout the day. Other days, I do go for a while and not check my game longer than 2 hours sometimes. And sometimes I log in those times and Golduck has not triggered. That's RNG, right? But the reality is, no matter how often you're actually logging in or not, there are going to be skill triggers missed with a Golduck. Part of the consideration you should have as you evaluate whether or not to use a Golduck is just how risk averse you are. Now, evaluating my Golduck Hanabi, one of the things that I determined is that even if I'm only collecting every 2 hours, which means, yeah, I'm missing some of those skill triggers, the overall strength still comes out to be more than what most of my other Pokemon can provide. So Golduck is a high risk, high reward Pokemon. Every Pokemon's production is RNG based, but Golduck has extreme variability. So the reason to choose a berry specialist over a Golduck is for a more consistent output of Snorlax strength. Whereas Golduck, at the mercy of RNG, you could have some bad days that set you back. You could have some really good days that put you forward, and as we noted with that week by week comparison, it does seem to all balance out. The next thing I learned is that the best Pokemon Sleep players have already liked the video by this point, and the ones who are still becoming the best are doing it right now. Now, on the Goldfather, we saw that there are days with an extremely high number of skill triggers. Those are the days that you're going to miss the most skill triggers. The days where you have the low number of skill triggers are the days where you're going to get them all. That's going to be true of any Golduck. On the lucky days, if you're not logging in constantly, you are going to miss them. You're missing them because Golduck got lucky. But even on those days, if every time you're logging in, you're getting that double trigger, you're still going to end up with a ton of Snorlax strength. The last thing I want to call out is that a good Golduck can put up extreme numbers, even at level 10 and level 25. If it has complementary nature and sub-skills for those skill triggers and a level 7 main skill, Golduck could carry you through this game. Now if we look at Rainanex, I do have some berry Pokemon that if we turn on favorite berry at Greengrass Isle for every single berry, which obviously we can't do, but for the purposes of testing this, I only have one Pokemon that comes out above Golduck. That is my Raichu. It has Berry Finding S and Helping Bonus, Speed of Up Nature. It's one of the best berry specialists I have by far. I have some other berry specialists that come close to the production of Golduck, and if I was running on their favorite berry, would be worth potentially switching them out because of that guaranteed strength, not worrying about the RNG. But in most cases, Golduck outperforms everything. Even when my Golduck is running slow, and by that I mean I'm not using good camp ticket and I'm only collecting every 2 hours, my Golduck is producing 85,000 strength on average. So if we take that into Rain and X, I have a couple of berry specialists that are right around that same strength, and so I could lock in that strength when they have favorite berry. But anything else in my box, I'm missing out if I'm not running Golduck. If we take away that favorite berry consideration, no Pokemon in my box is even close to matching Golduck. And so whether I'm collecting them frequently or not, it's putting out the most strength. I have a couple of other good, very good Golducks in my box, and with the level 7 main skill, at level 25, one of them still jumps up into the top 10 of all of my Pokemon in terms of total strength. Now I'd never run that when I could run my one that's at the top of the list, of course, but just wanted to re-emphasize that even at level 25, right, Golduck could just wow you. So you'll have to weigh this out for yourself, obviously. Whatever Golduck you have, if it had that level 7 main skill, how does it compare to everything else in your box? But now you'll also have a way to know, beyond whatever Rain and X reports as its potential, if you were to account for your playstyle. And let's be real, if you're not going to log in at least every 8 helps for Golduck, you probably shouldn't use it. If I look at my chart, I can go 150 minutes and still get 83% production. That's still a huge amount of strength. Anyway, hopefully I gave you some stuff to think about at least. This is a decision you'll have to obviously make for yourself. Now, for those of you who really want to evaluate your Golduck, here's the things you're going to need to know and make sure you configure in Rain and X before you go and grab that Golduck's numbers to drop them into this tool. You're going to want to go into the little gear in the upper right hand corner where there's lots of different settings available. If you first go to the tab called Others, you can toggle on or off Good Camp Ticket. Obviously, you're going to want to know what that strength looks like, what the production looks like, and that will dramatically affect your help duration as well as your number of helps per day. You're also going to want to jump over to the Energy tab, which is the first one. Here, you want to make sure you set your sleep schedule. This will definitely impact your helps per day because you won't be collecting helps when you're sleeping. And Golduck is one who's likely to wake up with a double skill trigger, but you might be better off running something else overnight since you're not going to be collecting. Unless you have a newborn baby. Next, you're going to want to make sure that your energy settings are configured properly. This is also going to affect the number of helps per day for your Golduck, but you don't have to worry about accounting for energy when you use my tool if you have this set up to reflect your healer situation, because the helps per day is calculated off of that. Next, jump over to the map bonus tab and make sure your area bonuses are configured. Actually, you don't have to do that. That will make sure that your numbers are reflecting accurately when you're testing and comparing your berry specialists to Golduck in your Rain and X box. But as far as my tool is concerned, you can just enter in the area bonus of whatever area you want. And there actually is a toggle for always max energy. And you might be wondering about the skill rate mode. I have mine set to raw only. For Golduck, I don't think it's going to matter. Golduck is not hitting its pity proc. It's triggering. You're not going to get so unlucky with the Golduck that it will hit its pity proc. Okay, if you have a good one, you won't hit it. For those who did, thank you for finally subscribing, and for those who have been around, I appreciate you being in the Golduck gang with me, even if your best Golduck is Hanabi on my channel. Let's do this again sometime. Happy researching.